Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for joining us on the first Working for Home talk. My name is Barry Coons. I decided to put these on more for community than anything else. We're all stuck at home at the moment, all self-isolating or whatever the correct term we should be using, social distancing. And I thought, what a better time than use some of this time to invest in ourselves a little bit, look at the skills that we've got, make sure we're looking after ourselves. So first of all, I must thank my employer, Computer World, for allowing us to use their Zoom account for hosting this. I intend on making the video or audio of this available afterwards, so hopefully if you find this of use. I'd like to thank my first two speakers that have volunteered to speak. So we've got Mark Terrell and we've got Nikki Marshall. These are two people that I've worked with and seen present many times, and I'm really pleased to have them on board today. So I think without any further ado, I will pass over to Mark to start his presentation. Nikki and I will go on mute, and then Mark's got 25, 30 minutes, and we're going to pass over to Nikki. If you've got any questions as the presentations are going on, if you put them in the chat or Q&A feature, I'll feed those to Mark or Nikki at the appropriate times.
Fabulous. Right, I will share my screen. Actually, let's do first my PowerPoint. Hopefully that works. Let's start that off.
Yeah,
right.
See that, Mark?
Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's just to confirm you're in the right place. Thank you, Barry, for the opportunity to do this talk. I've done this talk a few times in networking groups the last 12 to 18 months. And I thought it was useful in that leadership, obviously we're seeing leadership played out in front of us at the moment. Obviously Boris and his team, they're having to show some pretty big leadership skills in that they're leading us into something that's never been done before. And I think it's all relevant to all of us, so we can use some of this to hopefully, not just in these troubled times, but actually in our day-to-day life. So I've called this Playing the Leadership Jukebox, and you'll get the gist of why in a minute, because I sort of look at leadership as a life skill, as that was the title of this talk, because we can all use leadership skills in many aspects of our life, whether it's at home, whether it's in a social situation, whether we are looking to become a leader part of the leadership team in the future. The trouble in most cases is that we get to that position that don't have the skills that we need. And if you can get some of the skills beforehand and actually understand what those skills are, hopefully you will be more prepared and you'll ultimately be a better leader when the time comes. So as I mentioned, it's the Leadership Jukebox, and the reason being I've used some of the well-known songs to highlight what I meant now, what I mean by what these principles are. So first one is knowing me, knowing you. And at this point, most people go, aha, whether you actually do it or sometimes they do it in the head. And that's what tends to happen. And why knowing me, knowing you? Well, first of all, if you're going to be in a leadership position, you need to understand yourself. You need to know the things that matter to you. You need to know your behavioral styles. You need to know what motivates you. You need to know exactly how your leadership is actually going to affect others. And the first place to start is yourself, and understand what that means. There's loads of tools out there that can help you understand yourself better, understand those key traits that are going to help you, and maybe things that maybe won't help you, and use that information so that you can actually understand what role they play in leadership. So once you know yourself better, you can then understand other people better. I use two main tools. One is a color profiling model, which gives us the 4 different color energies when it comes to behavioral styles. Understanding that is really, really useful. I highly recommend looking into that if you haven't already. And I'm not going to go into too much detail today, but find out what your natural behavioral style is, and then understand others that might be different to you, which maybe you've already detected that some people look at things or tend to approach things different to you, and understanding they're not doing it in spite of you. They're actually just, that's their way. And it's not about changing them, it's actually understanding them so that you actually can meet in the middle. So knowing me, knowing you is a very important place to start as far as any leadership position. Next thing then is, do you know where you're going to? Now, this is referring to vision, understanding what it is, where we're going, so you can actually tell other people. So I see so often that business leaders and managers aren't really telling people what they actually want from their team, actually where they're going ultimately. And again, I've mentioned the current situation we've got at the moment. We all need to know where we're going, don't we? We really know. We want to be told, how is this affecting us? What can we do? And you can only, you know, when you set a vision, then people get on board. And that's why people are, you know, I see over 500,000 people have volunteered to help the NHS, giving their time for free. It's because everyone are pulling together. They know what the vision is. They know what's got to be achieved. And so that's the thing that brings people together, knowing where you're going and making sure everybody knows what that vision is. Where are we heading to, and what is the ultimate goal at the end of all this? So understanding where that fits in. And let's remember that not just at work, not just in these troubled times, but actually using and making sure your vision and you're telling other people is really important. Now, I mentioned that I've did this talk a few times in networking meetings. I explained the 4 steps of leadership to somebody, and that's starting with vision. And straight away, well, not straight away, at the Q&As at the end, she said to me, Mark, I realised what I did wrong when I moved my family to Bristol. I didn't actually set the vision, and I didn't tell them what the vision was. I had it in my head, but I didn't tell anybody. And so my kids, when they came to Bristol, were looking for the things they had in London, and they missed those things. And I hadn't told them the actual benefits of moving. So very simple example of there. If you don't set the vision and tell people it, then ultimately it can go and work against you. So that's why it's really important. Next, it must be love, love, love. Obviously a madness or a labia-free hit. And the reason I put this in there is that if you're leading a team, you've got to love them all equally. And you've got to be consistent, and you can't have those that are special to you. And being consistent and treating everybody equally and loving everybody for what they are. And it goes back to that knowing me, knowing you a bit. It's understanding that everyone's different, understanding they all have a place and a role to play. It's not about changing everybody, but it's actually understanding where their best place is, where their best role is, what they actually can bring to the team, whichever team that is, whether it's your team at home or team at work or team wherever, understanding the role that they play and being consistent in what you actually give to each member of the team. So loving them all in equal measures. If you leave me now, well, the last thing we want is someone to leave us. I'm saying that actually sometimes it's best for some people to leave in certain situations. If you're not fitting into the team, if there's no place for you in the football team, then it's best for you to find another team. But the reason I put this in here is that sometimes if we don't do the right things, then ultimately people will leave us. And the first sign that things aren't right is that people that you really want to be around and want to stick around aren't sticking around. So if you see people leaving, that's a good sign, or well, not a good sign, but a sign that things aren't quite landing well with your team. So look out for that. Again, if you haven't got your team on board at home with what's going on, maybe they need to understand why things are happening. I've had a funny story where my mum lives. She lives in a block of flats which is sort of managed, and some of the residents are carrying on as normal, meeting for coffee in the coffee lounge. And obviously that is not helpful at the moment. It's actually putting their lives in danger. But rather than sticking by the rules, they've told not to meet in the lounge, but now they're meeting in the laundry. So now they've had a stern letter to tell them that they are not to do that anymore. So slightly off track there, but it's just something come to mind. So understanding when people are leaving you, that's a sign that something isn't quite right in your team. I don't want to miss a thing. Now, this is one of the most important things that I teach and teach and teach, is that catching people doing things right is such an important thing. Again, not just in the workplace, at home. If we are setting this vision and we're setting certain boundaries around that, and the principles that we want to do, and our values and behaviors that we want, we've got to make sure that we catch people doing those things. So, because we need to tell them that that is the right thing. Because if you catch people doing things right and you tell them, they are far more likely to do it again. As human beings, we're not very good at it naturally. We don't catch people doing things right. We are programmed to catch people doing things wrong. That's what we do. We're really good at it. You know, you can see stuff on social media all the time, catching people doing things wrong. We love it, don't we? Catch people, they've got something wrong. But how often do people actually catch people doing things right and actually notice that? So it's really important to understand that if you're setting a vision and then you want certain behaviors, you want to make sure you catch those things happening. And if they're not right, catch people doing things wrong as well, but make sure you just bring them back on track, like a flight plan. You know, with a flight plan with an aircraft going from A to B, they don't actually go then generally A to B in a direct line. They go on a path, and they need to keep on that path to make sure that they actually end up at B from A. So don't miss a thing. Is about making sure that you are noticing. That's the important thing there. So the secrets. See how we're going with time. We can find. Now this is some of the things that I put in highlighting and promoting these events. Is I'd said, what can the Spice Girls teach us about leadership? And this is the thing. I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really, really want. Now, people are not very good at being explicit about what they want. Now, I'll put this in terms of the domestic situation again, because we can all relate to it. If you are going to tell your child to tidy their bedroom, if you just tell them to tidy their bedroom, they will likely to tidy it their way. They'll do it the way that they think is tidy. If you tell them, I want you to go to your bedroom and put all your clothes away, I want you to make your bed, and I want you to vacuum the floor, that's being explicit in what you expect. So that is what I'm talking about here. Tell them what they want, what you really, really, really want, not some vague concept about tidiness, because my tidiness is different to my partner's and her daughter and all those things. So you've got to be explicit as to what you expect, because ultimately the best way to find out whether you're being clear, explicit, and telling what you really, really want is actually to look at what actually happens. Because if it doesn't happen the way you want it to happen, that means that you haven't been clear enough. You haven't told them what you really, really want. And the thing that I tell my clients about this is that you don't have to do this forever, because you do this until you notice them doing it right. You catch them doing it right, and then they'll carry on doing it. So after a while, you don't have to keep telling them the same thing. So it's not like mollycoddling. It's actually being really clear, noticing it happening, and then making sure that you tell them that you've noticed, and then ultimately then they'll carry on doing it. So that's what the Spice Girls can teach us about leadership. Catch them doing the right thing. So this is such an important thing. I've come back to it. I've already mentioned about catching people doing things right. And so the one thing I haven't mentioned already is that we need to catch people doing things right at least 3 times, maybe 4 times more often than we catch them doing things wrong. Now, the reason we have to do that is because we have to make sure that they know that we are noticing that they are doing things right. If you only catch people doing things wrong, ultimately they know that you're just on a witch hunt. You're just finding fault, and you're not noticing the good things you do. So it's really important to catch them doing the right thing. For that reason, I've already mentioned about making sure that you tell people that when they're doing things right, they'll do more of them, and they're more likely to do it willingly. If you don't notice them, then they'll take it that you maybe haven't noticed, or maybe they might decide that actually maybe it was wrong, and then they start doing something different because you haven't told them it was right. So some of this stuff sounds a bit sort of as if, well, why should I do this? These are adults. But actually, we're all human beings, and we have to be reaffirmed and made clear exactly what's expected. So catch them doing the right thing, and then they will do more of it. Mention quickly about from a distance. What I've come across quite often is that when you get people that have a job and they are promoted to take charge of the team maybe that they've already been a part of, one of the things people struggle with is that they still want to be part of the team. Well, actually, they should actually understand that they've moved to a different team. It's important to give yourself a little bit of distance from the team so that you can actually do what I've been talking about, catch people doing things right, but also catch people doing things wrong and bring them back in on track. So from a distance is quite tricky, and it needs a lot of support from the new team. So if you've got someone that's just been promoted to look after a team in a leadership role, the one thing that they're going to be needing is support from others, because they're leaving one team. They want to know that they now belong in a new team, and then they can allow them to manage their old team and lead that team more effectively. What I see quite often is that those people become isolated quite quickly because they're not part of that team anymore. They then don't feel part of the new team quickly enough, and then they feel a bit in between, as if they don't fit in either. So it's really important to establish that distance, but actually make sure that you understand where you belong now. What's your team, your new team? And this is the final slide, and I was just going to wrap up at the end of that. You've got to be cruel to be kind, but in the right measures. And the reason why I've left this one to the last is because this is the crux of everything. I teach the mindset, the process, and skills, and this is where the mindset comes in. Mindset of leadership is really important in that you've got to get the balance right between support and challenge. Again, if I talk about this in respect to a domestic situation, maybe a parent situation, you tend to see parents are either overly supportive or overly challenging. Now, we want a mixture of that. So what we're talking about here is actually understanding that we need a combination of both. So we need to be equally supportive and challenging, so that we don't become the overly supportive, so that people become more too reliant on us, or become too challenging, and then we feel that people don't come to us. They don't feel as if they can be treated fairly, that it's always going to be a challenge and a very stressful situation all the time. So getting that balance of support and challenge right, and it really is, it's challenge and high support in equal measures. That's where we need to be whenever we're leading a team, and never is it more important than when you're being a parent. Understanding, yes, you need to be supportive, but you also need to be challenging to make sure that they are progressing, because that's where we grow. That's where we grow, when we get that feedback and we're challenged and people see that we can offer more. That's the thing. We can, and part of leadership is seeing in other people what they can do more of, and understanding and making sure that they know that you're doing it from the right place, understanding that you're supporting them and challenging them in equal measures. So just to wrap up then, I haven't talked much about what I do, but the Reluctant Leader podcast is out there for some stuff. Hopefully that's be useful. If you want to check that out, you can find that on the normal places for podcasts. And then just to wrap up, 3 points. Self-awareness is key. Having a vision and living and breathing it is essential. And realizing that people are people. We're not here to change everybody. It's actually understanding what our best traits are and making the most of each individual individually, and so that they fit into a team. And we actually feel that we are being the person that we want to be in the role that we've been given. So that's me. Thank you again for listening. And I guess at this point, Barry, if there's time, we can have some Q&As if there is any.
So Mark, question for me that I think the listeners may be interested to know. One of the things that you specialise in is motivational mapping. Would you mind just talking a little bit about motivation and why it's important and how you help people with that?
So motivation is essential, especially in a leadership perspective, because understanding what motivates us first is really important. Understanding what drives us, what gets us out of bed in the morning, understanding and make sure that we've got plenty of that in our role so that we can actually take conscious decisions to make sure that those things are actually happening. If you're not aware, then it's all a bit of a lottery. So understanding what motivation is firstly, having a tool like Motivational Map to measure what actually does motivate you, and then having a measurement as to how you feel those motivations are being met is essential starting point. And that's where motivational maps fits in, is that understanding yourself, again, going back to that knowing me, knowing you bit, understanding what motivates you, and then having a better understanding of motivation allows you to lead your team better, because you understand then the different motivations of your team, and you can then play your part in helping those that want to be motivated, and most people do, to encourage them and also play your part as the team leader.
Fantastic. Thank you very so much, Mark. And I think from my side, I've been on both sides. I've had motivational maps done with you and also had them done on my team. And it's certainly something that I always reflect upon. Certainly with all this going on, I've certainly dug out my motivational map and kind of look, what do I need to do to keep myself motivated during this time? It's also really good to reflect. So I've got a few questions coming in. From your perspective, what are the main differences between managing a remote team rather than an office-based team?
Yes. I think it's maintaining that connection, isn't it? And I think the technology we've got now, I know someone that's really specialised in it. It's not something I've done too much of, actually, managing remotely. But the most important thing is to actually have the screen on so that you're actually got that connection visually. Some people don't want to put it on, but what you've got to think about is the other person and understand what they want, and have meet them in the middle. So I think the key thing I've learned is to make sure that you're breaking down barriers and allowing the natural communication to happen. And by having the video on, it is a really important part of that.
Definitely. I think we're all trying to find and tune these new skills in not the normal way that we would do it. We're being thrown into it. So that's certainly interesting. So another question now around, when you're leading people, how do you kind of get that right balance between not feeling that you're micromanaging them, but ensuring that you're giving them enough support so they can be successful in their role? How do you kind of get that mix right?
And that goes back to that high challenge, high support model that I talked about at the end. Understanding that actually there's different stages in the process, which I haven't really covered, but the 4 stages of leadership is having a vision, mobilizing that vision, developing that vision, allowing other people then to actually have some input, and then ultimately others take responsibility and you can then delegate. So at different points in that process, you need to have a different skill. So initially you need to be very directive in that visioning stage. Then you need to be more coaching when you go into the mobilizing as things start to happen and people start to take action. And then as things start to work out, you can then step into more a mentoring role, and then ultimately delegating at the end. So it's all depends on where you are on the cycle. And if things aren't working well, that's a pretty good indication that you stepped into the next step too soon. Okay. And you need to then step back and say, right, actually, this isn't quite working. Let's step back a bit, reassess, and then go again.
Brilliant. I think that's a really clear framework to use, so thank you. So next question is vision. Is it up to the leader to create and then share, or is it better to be co-created?
I believe that the leader should be the one that sets the initial vision, because if you bring too many people in, then it gets too complicated. That's the whole role of having a leader. They have to set the initial vision, but as we know, visions develop, and it's allowing people at the right time to have their say. But you've got to get things moving first. There's no point in getting everybody on board and then having that committee situation where nobody can decide. You need someone to take the decisions and get things rolling.
I suppose it's like the spearhead of the arrow. The person or the organisation needs to find that spearhead, and then you bring everyone in behind you to make sure you're all going in the same direction.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So a question now from Ben Brown. Creating psychological safety in teams seems to be more important these days. How do you see the role of a leader in this, and how vulnerable should a leader be in order to show psychological safety?
Great question. Vulnerability is really important. I think that there's nothing worse than thinking that you have all the answers, and understanding, again, clients I work with, I say, look, there's nothing wrong with telling people that you haven't got all the answers. It's like Boris, he hasn't got all the answers, has he? We've got to give him a bit of space at the moment, and understanding that he said, we've never been to this before. I don't know whether this is going to, how this is going to work out. I can only go by the information I've got. I've got to rely on the information I've got. So I think the worst thing that anybody in a leadership role can do is actually assume that they have to make all the decisions and not share that out, and actually be vulnerable, actually understanding and telling people, actually, I don't quite know what to do here, guys. What do you think? But that's different to the actual vision stage. When you set the vision, it's actually once you start things moving, that's when you can get people involved and show that vulnerability, which I think is essential.
Definitely. No, I think that's really important. That balance is quite important, because people are looking for confidence in that leader, but then equally they want the leader to be human. So getting that balance is right. So a question now from Mark Stonham. Leaving one team and being supported by another. Thoughts leaving an employed team and going solo. The importance of finding a new peer/leader team.
So going self-employed and finding a new team? Is that what basically the gist of that?
Yeah, so it says thoughts regarding leaving an employed team and going solo, the importance of finding a new peer/leader team when doing so, I assume.
Right. I can tell you, well, most people leave employment because they're driven by freedom. Okay, so that's great. So after a while, they think, yeah, I've got all this freedom. But actually what happens, and I've seen it happen time and time again, is actually they feel that they don't belong anywhere anymore. And the reason, and then so what they can do then is to take some action around that. So if you want to be part of a team, it could be almost like a virtual team. It could be somewhere where you work, say a co-working space, you're part of their team, or you can just join the mastermind, or go to a networking group and join that and go regularly. So you sort of part of that team. So you feel that belonging, because that's what you miss when you go self-employed and you're a solopreneur or whatever you want to call yourself. You get loads of freedom, but actually, ultimately, we all need to feel that we belong. And it's finding somewhere where you belong is the key thing.
I'm a massive advocate for community. I think even people inside employment, you may feel you get to a point in your career where everyone is looking at you, everyone is looking for those answers for you, and having that place to go to be able to go and talk through things, to be able to gain ideas and gain direction. So I'm certainly a big advocate for finding your community, what community fits around you, and how can you give back to that community. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much, Mark. Thank you so much for the presentation. Where can people get hold of you if they would like to get in touch with you, Mark?
You can find the reluctantleader.academy online. I think that's the best place. All my contact details are there, or obviously on LinkedIn, Mark Terrell. You'll find all my details there. So yeah, that's the best place, I think.